Spider-Man No Way Home has been released and I have a lot to say about it, alright? So, just to get this out of the way, there are going to be a lot of spoilers past this point, so if you have not yet seen the movie, well, this is your warning, alright? So, let's go ahead and talk about the positives of the movie first, and there's a lot of good things to say about this movie. We will save the negatives for later, which I will leave the timestamps in the description below if you guys want to skip ahead to that section, alright? So, I'm gonna go ahead and break down all the reasons why I believe that out of all the Marvel movies we got in 2021, this movie was the most entertaining out of the bunch. So, yes, that means out of the ones that we got, like Black Widow, Eternals, and the other movies, this one is definitely the most, I would say definitely the strongest film, alright? So, this movie had a lot of villains to deal with, and to the movie's credit, so this is good news, despite having so many characters to handle, this movie handled it very well. So they did very well with it. Now, I know like some people even avoided the trailers, so they don't know like some of these because they're trying to avoid any potential leaks, any potential spoilers. So this had to deal with a lot of villains from the previous Spider-Man universes like Tobey Maguire's, and it also had some older villains from the Amazing Spider-Man universe. So that was Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man and his movies. So knowing how this could have potentially turned out, it could have been a disaster because they would have to give adequate screen time for all the older villains that were coming back from all these universes. So it also had to juggle with screen time regarding focusing on Tom Holland's Spider-Man and also focusing on the other two Spider-Man, like from Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield. So despite having all of these potential problems, this movie still executed this very well, and not once did I feel like any villain here was given either too little screen time or too much screen time. So it wasn't like we like unsatisfying for like say that the movie could have focused more on a certain character or it gave too little attention to another character. So I felt basically, to summarize this part up, I felt like it was perfectly balanced, and that is a big achievement because we have other movies that failed as a result of this. Like they gave either too little focus to a certain plot point and the movie overall ended up suffering for it, alright? So thankfully for Spider-Man No Way Home, this was done very well. So another thing that I also loved about this movie was how it really made the older Spider-Man franchises canon in the MCU. So when they first started talking about the multiverse, like back in, I believe it was 2019, I fostered a hope that they would eventually bring in some of the previous Spider-Man into the MCU. Though I did kind of like ponder over whether that was actually feasible or not, because I was wondering whether like it would have been extremely unlikely for the older actors to ever reprise their roles. But if I had known this 2 years ago, I would have been mind blown for sure. Like I certainly did not expect that, and especially where we saw Andrew Garfield vehemently denying that he was in this movie. So I actually was like wondering if that was gonna be like the biggest told you so of the decade, or if he would actually be in it and he was just trying to misdirect the fans. Well, I'm glad that Andrew Garfield was in the movie because like it was very awesome to see the three Spider-Man interacting. Like we had Tom Holland, Maguire, and Garfield. All of them had great chemistry on screen, and they also gave some life lessons to Tom Holland's Spider-Man. And this is especially true after the very shocking death of Aunt May, and I certainly did not expect her character to die. Like I said earlier, I avoided all spoilers for this movie, so the only thing that I knew about the movie were from the trailer that I watched when they released it. So other than that, I turned off YouTube, I avoided Twitter, I also avoided Reddit. So I went, like I did try to avoid any social media leading up to this movie because of how I got spoiled all the way back in when I was watching Endgame. So I made sure to not make the same mistake for this movie. So seeing Aunt May die on screen, that was the biggest surprise. I did not expect it at all. That was like the last thing I expected, alright? So yeah. We'll come back to the Aunt May death scene later in the video because like there are some stuff that I want to go talk about more, but we'll save that for later in the video, alright? So another thing I liked about this movie is how it also gave closure. So despite well, I'm sorry, no. Instead of only including these older Spider-Man into the movie, it also served as a closure to the older franchises as well. And I especially needed this for Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. Like, in his last movie, which is Amazing Spider-Man 2, Gwen Stacy died, and we also had him fighting Rhino at the end of the movie, which ended in a cliffhanger. So you can imagine my disappointment when I saw that a third movie was not happening. So I had no clue though that back in like 2015 that I would get closer to this in 2021. So I'm saying right now, if I could I'm just saying, it's just really awesome to think about. And we had the scene with Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. This is a big standout. Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man saving MJ. Now, I loved this moment because I did predict that it would happen when the trailer of the movie showed MJ falling, because it really gave me similar vibes to how Gwen died. But despite seeing it coming, I was still very happy that Garfield's Spider-Man finally got his redemption, and it was very well acted by Garfield himself, so his facial expressions absolutely sold this scene. So, all in all, this movie, No Way Home, your movie, capitalized on that opportunity, and it proved satisfying for every fan of each respective Spider-Man. So, it's really just amazing how far the MCU has come in regards to this. The possibilities they have opened up after No Way Home are almost endless, really, because we got the multiverse officially up and running for Phase 4. It seems to me, from these movies currently, that Phase 4 in general appears to have a stronger focus on incorporating the multiverse into future MCU projects. So, any Marvel project now, whether that be the TV shows or other movies, can now be connected to the MCU if they so choose to say that it's part of the multiverse. So, it's simply awesome. And now, since we're talking about TV shows and other MCU projects, I think it would be a good time now to mention that we actually see Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil, in this movie, and my theater actually got a loud applause for this. Now, although we don't see Daredevil for too long, he did play an important role in freeing Peter Parker of his criminal charges regarding the murder of Mysterio from the previous Spider-Man movie. And we know that Mysterio framed him up, alright? So, in regards to how Peter would get himself out of that problem, I'm glad they utilized Daredevil. I'm surprised, actually. I didn't see Daredevil in the... I didn't expect to see Daredevil in the movie, so that was a big surprise to me as well. Like I said before, though, I did avoid any spoilers, so... But looking up right now, apparently that was a big rumor, and I'm glad I did not know, so... It's kind of like I get to experience it all at once in the theater, so that's a good thing for me. What I also like about this movie is how it's not really over-reliant on fan service, as in they all basically serve to forward the plot without it feeling forced. Now, that is an important distinction from some other movies where it's only enjoyed because of the fan service. So, the problem with those kind of movies is that if you rewatch it again, the hype basically dies down, so it won't be as exciting on a rewatch. So, this movie was able to balance a good plot along with the fan service. So, it also had a good plot to sustain itself, so this movie can hold up for future rewatches, alright? So, yeah. So, we talked about the Spider-Man, we talked about the crossovers and everything. Let's move on now to the villains of this movie. So, what we have right now, we have the Lizard, we have Dr. Otto Octavius, we have the Green Goblin, we have Electro, and we have Sandman, alright? It was supposed to be the Sinister Six, but I don't know if I missed anything, but so far what we got here are 5 villains. So, I guess they were all brought into the MCU, and that was after Doctor Strange's failed spell in the first act of the movie. So, out of all the villains that we saw in this film, I would say that the Green Goblin, that's Norman Osborn, was definitely the scariest out of them all. So, this movie features great action sequences, especially the hallway fight where Peter realizes that Norman Osborn has been taken over, and a battle occurs, alright? And this is what I'll say about the fight scenes, where they're seemingly more brutal than the usual MCU fights, and I guess a way to explain this is you can truly feel the weight of each punch that Peter lands in Osborn, and this remains true as well for the film's climax when Peter Parker almost kills him, seemingly to get revenge on Aunt May's death, alright? And then we also had Maguire being stabbed. And dear God, when Maguire got stabbed, a lot of us were gasping in the theater. I legit thought he was going to die right there. But I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm glad he didn't die. But the way they set the scene up almost made me think that they were going to close out Maguire's Spider-Man storyline in a potential death scene. So, like, well done to Marvel for like having our emotions it's like similar to a roller coaster, you know. So they really had me about it. Now, as for the emotion thing, the ending as well, I want to talk about that, where we finally said goodbye to the other two Spider-Man. So we also said goodbye to the older villains when they were all brought back to their respective universes. Now, unfortunately though, for the ending, the spell that Doctor Strange had to cast upon the world to, I guess, prevent those, you know, people from coming through those portals had also erased everyone's memories of Peter Parker. So that unfortunately includes Happy, MJ, Ned, Daredevil, and all of Peter's closest allies, friends, and family. So they all forgot who he was, and the only thing the world knows now is the existence of Spider-Man. So they know Spider-Man exists, but not the man behind the mask, alright? So it is around this point where, I actually love to talk about this part, it's around this point where we saw Holland's Spider-Man's homemade comic accurate suit on the fabric in a sewing machine, and then him swinging around a snowy New York City. And now, this scene was perfection, and it also fits the somewhat depressing mood of the implications of the ending. Now, it also implies that Peter has to start anew, and his closest friends and girlfriend no longer even remember him. But the snowy New York City, the gloomy apartment, and it all makes you really feel a wide range of emotions. And really, that's one of the scenes that I want to rewatch a lot when it eventually comes out, like, you know, like for download and stuff. Like that last scene was just perfect. It also served as a good contrast to the first two MCU Spider-Man movies, where, discounting the Far From Home's post-credits scene, most of the previous two movies, they ended on a good or upbeat note. But that's not true for this one. It kind of was a great and bolder decision to end it in a more gloomy type of note right there, alright? So it also helps though that it's been recently confirmed that Spider-Man 4 is already in the works. So this is definitely not going to be the last time we see Tom Holland's Spider-Man. So it leaves us wanting more, especially in regards to see how we will reconnect with his older friends, as he's essentially starting from scratch if you really think about it. So all in all, a great closure, not just for this movie, but also for the previous Spider-Man franchises that came before it, alright? So I've gone ahead and talked about a lot of the positives, but now let's go ahead and talk about the negatives of this movie. So despite having a lot of good things and a lot of good scenes, good action sequences, and an interesting plot, it is not without its flaws, alright? So let's go ahead and talk about the negatives of the movie now, alright? Let's start with Peter's entire motivation to visit Doctor Strange, where his friends didn't get into MIT as a result of the Spider-Man controversy, and how Peter's family and friends' lives were essentially turned upside down after Mysterio had revealed his identity. So this is in the first act of the movie. So honestly, I thought it was quite a weak reason. Now hear me out on this, is because Doctor Strange even scolds him actually and perfectly states that you didn't think of exhausting all other options before asking me to brainwash the entire world. Like he actually yelled it at Peter, and I actually was nodding in agreement. Now, do you remember, I want to bring up the saying, actions speak louder than words, and this will apply for someone like Peter who, I guess was seen as a menace to society after what Mysterio did. But for someone as smart as Peter, he could have first, instead of deciding to risk that kind of spell, he could have first decided to attempt to clear his name. So I know that would take quite long to prove himself, but eventually the controversy, if you think about it, the controversy would fade away if the world would be able to see over time that Spider-Man is not the menace that Mysterio and the news articles are making him out to be. So he could have assessed exactly also that now, let's say Peter wants to go directly to Strange instead, he still could have done this in a much more safer way. So what I mean by that is that he could have assessed exactly what he wanted Doctor Strange to do. Because let me remind you, the only reason why this spell failed was because Peter kept on interrupting him. Now, I know Wong does warn him about it being potentially unstable or dangerous, but Strange had it under control until Peter kept interrupting him over and over. He was saying, oh, make everybody forget, but not MJ, not Ned, not Happy, and not blah blah blah. So he had all these interruptions that Peter was doing, and that led to Strange losing control of the spell, because Peter said this after Doctor Strange had already started trying to cast a spell, alright? So, for something as risky as this, as brainwashing the entire world, as Strange put it, as something that even Wong was emphasizing specifically, I found it a bit weird that Strange didn't push to get every single detail from Peter before starting his spell. Like, the even weirder part is how Peter was rushing to do it without thinking first what exactly he wants to wish for, despite multiple sorcerers stating more than once that it is too risky. So, as a result, you would think that he'd make sure to tell Strange that there is no rush. I want to think about what I want to happen, so we want people to forget who I am, but please make sure that the people who are closest to me, like MJ or Ned or all of my important friends, make sure that they don't forget. Like, he could have had enough time to think about it. There was no rush, but for some reason Peter just went ahead and said to do it. So you would think that Peter would have the sense to introspect first before making such a monumental decision, but apparently not. So another one I'd like to talk about in terms of the negatives is the Marvel humor. So thankfully the rest of the movie was great enough to balance it out, but there were some times when the comedy didn't land. Like, for example, when they laughed at Dr. Octavius' name, or Doctor Strange saying the Scooby-Doo line in the movie. So in the trailer, I also cringed at the line when he said Scooby-Doo this, and thankfully though in the movie, it didn't seem as bad, but it was still a bit weird, alright? So, and this is the next one I want to talk about. Like, earlier in the video, if you recall, I said I would bring up Aunt May's death, so this is it, alright? So, when it came to the actual scene though, despite it being unexpected, I personally didn't really feel Aunt May's death as much as the movie might have wanted me to feel, because, I don't know, there was a lot of, like, I'm gonna compare this to the other scene in Amazing Spider-Man 2 when Gwen Stacy died. Like, it had great acting by Tom Holland, but I did feel like something was missing overall. Like, when I was watching the Amazing Spider-Man 2, when we got to the moments when Gwen Stacy was killed in the Amazing Spider-Man, I remember I felt very distraught during that scene. So it really feels like whoever did the one in No Way Home, they didn't really live up to the level of the Amazing Spider-Man 2's death scene. Now, I know that the Amazing Spider-Man 2 movie was not perfect, but like say whatever you want to say about the movie, but they really did Gwen's death scene a lot better than Aunt May's death in this movie. Like, I don't know, like I've also watched this movie twice, okay? So one was on December 16th and on December 17th. So I have seen the movie twice, and both times didn't make me feel too upset. Now, despite this though, I really loved the payoff because it led to Tom Holland's Spider-Man almost losing hope. So it led to one of the best scenes in the movie where we see Maguire's Spider-Man and Garfield's Spider-Man giving him hope, and also they referenced Uncle Ben as well from their own respective universes. So it did make up for the weak death scene of Aunt May despite that. So I'm not really too bothered by it in the long run, alright? So, all in all, let's go ahead and get to the verdict now. So, this is a great Marvel movie, and a big part of the appeal is the nostalgia. So, along with Tom Holland's Peter Parker and his character growth throughout all the MCU movies in general. So, he has come a long way from his first appearance in Captain America: Civil War. And it also provided a good amount of closure to many old Spider-Man movies released in the last 2 decades, and delivered a powerful and satisfying conclusion. And I also like how it corrected some mistakes from the previous Spider-Man franchises, and it really delivers everything a Spider-Man fan would want in a story. And it encapsulates not just Tom Holland fans, but also Maguire and Garfield as well. So therefore, this means that everyone who has been a fan of the Spider-Man movies since 2002 has been acknowledged, alright? So, great acting, great soundtrack, and great action scenes. So, despite the problems in the plot of the movie sometimes, I will still give this movie a 4 out of 5, and it's definitely the best 2021 Marvel movie, that's for sure, alright? So, if you haven't yet seen the movie, I really do recommend it. If you have gotten this far in the review, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for watching. Raphael out, and I will see you in the next video. Peace out.